Supreme Court has rejected an appeal by 4 former Guantanamo Bay prisoners who want to sue the government for torture and psychological abuse. Their lawyers say the more effectively rubber stamps the controversial techniques by the U.S. military. For more on that, let's cross live to RT's Priya Sridhar in our Washington studio. Hello, Priya. Well, although President Obama has already chosen one new home for some of the Guantanamo detainees, it seems contention is never far from the shores of the camp. Is that right?
Hi, Kelly. Well, that's right. You know, only 100 detainees from Guantanamo are going to be sent to that Illinois prison, and the U.S. is still looking for places to send other detainees that they want to release. So the controversy that is Guantanamo is far from over. And joining me to help talk about all the latest is attorney Shane Kadidal from the Center for Constitutional Rights. Shane, thanks so much for joining me.
Thanks for having me.
So first of all, I want to start out with this case of the 4 detainees that were attempting to sue Donald Rumsfeld and other people. And the United States Supreme Court decided that they weren't going to hear this case. Do you think that this is going to set a precedent for torture in the future with the United States?
Well, we'll see. You know, one of the things that's most striking about the opinion is that it says that the opinion below that the Supreme Court decided not to review is that it says that that torture is kind of a foreseeable thing that will happen when people are held in military detention. I mean, it's kind of amazing to me that the Obama administration wasn't concerned to make sure that that didn't stay on the books because of, you know, the consequences for Americans who might be held as prisoners in future wars. But, you know, this whole case really is very emblematic of a lot of the failings of the Obama administration. On the one hand, you know, they pay lip service to human rights. They'll say that torture is wrong, that it doesn't work, that it's legally prohibited everywhere. On the other hand, they're not interested in prosecuting people who carried out torture, and they're not interested in seeing financial accountability for people who did torture and in paying restitution to people who were torture victims.
That's right. And, you know, in President Obama's first few weeks of office, he signed an order that he was going to try to shut down Guantanamo Bay by January of next year, which is in just a few weeks. And clearly that's not going to happen. What are the hurdles that still stand in the way for President Obama, and why hasn't this happened yet?
Sure. Well, you know, I think what happened was that, you know, he tried to set up expert panels to get rid of the issue, to review the cases and decide what should be done, rather than taking a strong principled stand and just saying we're going to try to figure out who should be charged. We're going to charge those people in ordinary criminal courts instead of trying to make decisions about who should be charged in a military commission and who should get a regular criminal trial. And everyone who we don't charge is going to be sent home. If they had done that at the outset last January, I think they could have cleared the place out in 3 months, but for the hardest cases. And those cases are basically the 50 people who are from countries like Libya, Tunisia, Uzbekistan, Syria, countries with horrible human rights records where we would never send anyone back there because of the fear of torture. And, you know, the problem there is that European countries are willing to take most of those people as a favor to Obama to help him clean up President Bush's mess, as a lot of their leaders have told us. But the problem is they want to see the United States doing something, too. And unfortunately, the Republicans in Congress have barred Obama from bringing any detainees to the United States to release them. And having seen that, the Europeans say, well, why should we help you out with the problem when you're not doing anything to solve it yourself?
And, you know, I want to ask you, at one point the Supreme Court ruled that these detainees did have constitutional protection, and it seemed like many of them would, you know, have a possibility to be tried in U.S. courts. But now the Supreme Court kind of reversed that and said that they aren't, you know, they don't have constitutional rights. What happened? Why was there this flip-flop?
Well, it's not so much what the lower court did. You know, in the future, they might take another case. You know, the problem is this. In the U.S., we give immunity from civil liability for damages for officials who do things in good faith that they think might be legal. And so what the Bush administration argued in this case to the lower court was this. They said, look, it wasn't, you know, perfectly clear in the law back in 2004 when these guys were in Guantanamo that you know, any legal protections existed for non-citizens held at Guantanamo. So the Bush people argued it wasn't clear that you had any legal rights in Guantanamo until the Supreme Court decided the landmark case in 2004. And all of these men were released right before that case was decided. You know, but the problem here is this. There can be no sort of argument that in good faith people thought that they could use torture or religious humiliation against any detainees, whether they were picked up on the battlefield or elsewhere. So, you know, this whole concept of a good faith notion that somehow it wasn't clearly established at law that these detainees had a right not to be tortured or a right not to have their Korans thrown in their toilet buckets, as happened in these cases.
And so what's going to happen now for these 4 detainees? Are there any other avenues they can pursue? Can they go to an international court of some sort, or is it over now?
Yeah, I mean, as far as getting any financial restitution for what happened, I think, there's really hardly any avenues left. And that's probably true for an awful lot of the other detainees. There are some follow-on cases for people who were cleared by their military panels. But now I think, what we're looking at is something more like what happened with the Japanese Americans after World War II, where they have to go to Congress and ask Congress to pay them, in compensation for what happened to them. And for the Japanese Americans, it took 50 years for that to happen.
Well, Shane, I want to thank you so much for joining me, and we'll continue to keep you updated on the potential closure of Guantanamo Bay whenever that'll happen. But for now, Kelly, it's back